Hello, my chicklets. Thank you for stopping by. Welcome to day 4 of AU August. This is our giant and tiny AU. Now, I'm really excited about this one because this was one of my favorite ones to write during this event, and I would love to turn it into something larger, but I just haven't had the time. So if anybody wants to take this concept and turn it into a full story, make sure to tag me so that I can read all of it. Without further ado, let me read to you A Fresh Start. On days like this, Virgil hated the first borrower who got themselves caught. He knew the legends that borrowers at one time lived within the walls of houses, undetected, borrowing what they needed and nothing more, never being seen, never being heard. That had all changed when one borrower got caught and blabbed about their existence. As soon as a single human knew, their anonymity was shot. And now, Virgil lived as a fighter. Each day he was thrown into a ring, attempting to fight his way out against the other borrowers. He had to fight. If he didn't get food, and he wasn't going to die at the hands of a human. Especially not while trying to protect Janice, even if he did so reluctantly. Borrowers looked out for one another. That didn't mean that Virgil liked Janice. The other borrower had been a lab specimen before being a fighter, and that came with some pretty nasty quirks. He was skittish, and the first time Virgil tried to approach him, he had gotten bit. If he had been a normal borrower, Virgil could have let that go, but lab borrowers were different. No one was ever prepared for what a lab borrower might be able to do. He had heard of one in the fighting rings who had taken on 100 borrowers all at the same time, and survived. The thought still gave Virgil chills. Apparently, after that incident, he had been sold off to the cleaner, a shadow figure who went to borrower fights all over the country and bought troublesome borrowers. Janice was considered troublesome. Virgil had been in a coma for 3 days after being bitten and had a fever for 2 weeks after that. He barely survived his fights, and their owner wasn't happy about it. Janice refused to fight, saying it was beneath him. But Virgil wasn't going to let another borrower die, not if he could help it. Janice might have been a prick, but he was still going to fight to protect him. That meant Virgil ended up doubling his fights, to the amusement of his owner. He fought twice as hard, twice as often, and wasted twice as much energy. He was beginning to run out of stamina, but he had yet to come up with a plan to get himself and Janice out. "You don't have to fight for me," Janice said, keeping to his side of the cage. "I'm quite content pissing him off by simply existing." "Yeah, well, I told you before I'm not letting you die." Despite Virgil's eyes being closed, he could feel Janice rolling his. "You're burning yourself out. If you don't stop this soon, he's going to sell you to the cleaner. Possibly both of us, anyway." "What's the likelihood we run into that human anyway?" The silence was answer enough. They both knew that the chances were pretty high. The fights only happened in major cities where it was easier to hide what was happening. They also happened on a rather regular schedule. The cleaner would eventually make it to their city. Virgil knew this. Janice knew this. Every borrower in the ring knew this. But Virgil was trying to be ignorant. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he was always aware that there was a possibility that he would get cleaned, but if he allowed his brain to focus on it, he would eventually be overcome by it. "I'm going to rest for my next fight. Don't wake me up unless you're dying." He could almost see Janice rolling his eyes again, and that was enough to help Virgil rest. If he could just keep that little bit of normalcy, maybe he could force himself to keep going. Virgil woke up sore and cold. That was nothing new. The floor of the cage was always too hard for him to sleep well, and though sometimes the two borrowers would snuggle for warmth, they would never admit it in the morning. "Get up!" Their cage was shaken forcefully, and Virgil felt panic rise in his chest, but he forced it down. He didn't have the luxury of panicking, not when he was just trying to stay alive. Instead, he tried to steady himself on the cage's walls, holding on and hoping to not be jostled much further. He then looked over at Janice. He looked a bit sick to his stomach, but otherwise okay. "All right, you little shit." Hand reached in to grab him. Virgil tried to keep his body loose. Time for your fight. He must have slept in longer than normal. That wasn't good. Going into a fight groggy never served him well, and he had already failed in his last fight. Better put on a good performance, too, or you and your buddy are both going to the cleaner. Shit, no, this wasn't happening. His throat got caught in his chest. He had to fight. He had to win. How was he going to win? Shit. He saw the swing coming and he dodged, barely, but he hadn't been prepared for the knee that followed. Virgil doubled over in pain, trying to roll out of the way, trying to get himself somewhere safe. Sorry. He heard the other borrower whisper before he felt the elbow come down on his neck. His vision went white from the pain, then blurred as he tried to push himself up, until it finally faded to black. Janice had been in the cage, watching the fight. He knew that if he had fought, he would just get himself killed. The cold floor made it hard for him to regulate his heat, and he felt disoriented most mornings. He never would have survived a fight. So, of course, that meant he wanted the dumbass to fight his battles, putting himself into more harm's way in order to fight for a life that Janice wasn't even enjoying. He was staring through one of the holes in their cage, watching as Virgil scrambled away, only to be hit by an elbow. This was bad, really, really bad. But Janice had to keep a level head. They were going to be sold to the cleaner. Maybe when they were transferred over, there would be a chance to escape, but Virgil was unconscious. How was Janice going to get him out as well? If it weren't for the other borrower's self-sacrificial nature, Janice would have left him, but he owed Virgil a debt, and he hated leaving debts unpaid. Biting his lip, he tried to think as the human holding the cage swore, scooping Virgil out of the ring and tossing him roughly into the box. Guess they were right about needing to replace you shits every 2 years or so. Damn, and I thought the lab rat could be my next fighter. Janice wanted to hiss. They weren't rats, but now was not the time for that fight. He quickly walked over to Virgil, checking his pulse. He was still alive, at least, so that was good, but he was no closer to waking up. Janice attempted to shake him as the movement of their cage stopped. You the cleaner? Why were humans so loud? There wasn't a response from the other human. Maybe this was just a bluff. Good. I've got 2 for you. The useless fighter you just saw and a lab rat. I want at least 500 for both. You want 500 for an unpredictable experimental test subject? The second human spoke, his voice soft and menacing. Janice would never admit the shiver that went up his spine and the cold, clinical way those words were said. And for a fighter you have already shown is exhausted. Damn right. I shall give you 400. After a performance like that, no one else will take them off your hands. That's a rip-off. I paid 3 for the rat and 5 for the fighter. Yes, and I'm sure you made at least some profit off of the 2 of them since then. 4 is my final offer. There was a bit of grumbling before their cage jerked again, and Janice knew they were being handed off. Fine, whatever. At least you have cash. Pleasure doing business with you, the man said, voice still quiet, calm, and confident. Then they began to move again. This time, there was more of a smoothness to the way their cage moved. Janice assumed they were being held not by the handle, but with a hand on either side of the cage, like they had at the lab. He knew about the cleaner, but he had never thought they might be another scientist. He didn't want to go back. He couldn't go back. He slammed himself against the cage door, hoping it might budge. Falling out of the cage would be better than going back to a lab. He couldn't do it again. Please calm yourself. The voice was even softer this time. We are almost to the car. I will let you out then. That wasn't helping. Janice didn't believe him. Humans were cruel. Janice continued to hurl himself at the door until the cage stopped moving, and only because it threw him off balance. Remus, can you open the door once I've gotten back to my seat? Okie dokie, arty dorky. That wasn't the voice of a human. No matter how gently a human spoke, they couldn't replicate the cadence of a borrower. Patton, do you have all the supplies you need? I could always do with more cookies. There was a second borrower. What was this human doing with 2 borrowers who sounded very much alive and healthy? You have a full sleeve of Oreos. I don't believe that a second sleeve will make them feel any better. It wouldn't hurt. Janice heard a soft, exasperated sigh before hearing and feeling the closing of a trunk. It was done gently, but it still rocked the cage, and the sound echoed through Janice's body. Virgil still wasn't up, and he wasn't a fighter, but he had to protect the unconscious borrower, right? He owed him that much. The lock clicked on the cage, and the door began to open. Janice bared his fangs, ready to attack before seeing the borrower come into view. He had wild, messy hair that was black as ink with a few gray streaks that somehow looked unnatural. The two of them locked eyes, and then the other borrower squealed. "Look, Patton, another testy!" "Remus, don't call them that." A shorter borrower popped his head in. "Hey, kiddos, would it be okay if I came in and looked over your injuries?" "What?" Janice was taken aback, eyes filling with confusion as he took in the first borrower. Remus had vine-like appendages that wriggled out of his back, and the second borrower, Patton, apparently, was holding a little kit with a red cross on it. They had those in the lab, bigger ones that humans used to fix up scrapes that they had. "I know this is all confusing, but we're here to help. I'm Patton, and this is Remus. Can I come in and take a look at your friend?" Janice looked between the two. "Only you." He could probably take the smaller one if needed to, but he wasn't sure about the other. Lab borrowers were unpredictable, and he would know. "Okay, I can work with that." Patton began walking in slowly, telegraphing all of his movements so that Janice could follow him. When he made it close to Janice and Virgil, Janice stepped aside but stayed close. "So, what are your names, kiddos? I'd hate it if I couldn't at least give you that respect." "You can call me J, and he's V." "Okay, Jay. Let's take a look at your friend and see if I can help." Janice watched closely as Patton began to gently look Virgil over. He was finally beginning to relax a little when he heard the engine turn on and felt them move. It wasn't extremely loud, almost as if they had added a bit of soundproofing to this area. Even the movement wasn't too forceful, though Janice could still feel it. "Where's the human taking us?" "Back to our home," Patton said with a happy, calming smile. "It's okay. Logan isn't anything like the rumors. He actually helps rescue the borrowers." Janice wanted to believe him. He really did. "I was given to him as a pet a few years ago. I think close to 6 now. But Logan is super curious, and we got talking. He realized how bad it was to keep borrowers as pets, and so he asked me what I wanted. I told him I wanted to help other borrowers, so that's what we started doing. At first, it was just buying borrowers from the stores, but then we learned about the fights, and well, here we are." Throughout his whole story, Patton didn't stop looking at Virgil, trying to hide his flinch when he saw certain bruises. "And what exactly are you going to do to us when you get us back to your home?" He wasn't going to let his defenses down just because of a happy face and a soft smile. "I'll probably ask your friend to stay until he's all healed up. After that, it's up to you. We can help you relocate, or you can join our community. Logan is the only human who lives there, but we have a pretty big borrower community." "And what exactly does this community do?" Patton looked up surprised and confused. "We just live, kiddo. I'm not sure what you mean." "I'm assuming the human makes you do something for living in his space." "No, not really. I mean, Logan and I are still pretty close, so we research stuff together, but some of us don't interact with Logan at all because they feel more comfortable that way." It sounds too good to be true. "Well, we do ask that if you stay in our community, you help out, mending, gathering food, whatever you're capable of. That way we can all pitch in and help each other." Patton pulled something out of the med kit and began to carefully smear it on Virgil's bruises. "What's that?" "A bruise cream. It'll help him heal. Do you want to see it?" Patton held up the jar to Janice, who pretended to investigate it. It didn't smell like poison, but he would have no way of knowing if it was safe. "Continue, I guess." "I'm bored out here. Can I come in?" Remus called from outside the door, and Patton looked up to Janice for permission. He nodded hesitantly. "Sure, Ree. Can you bring in the cookies too? I know I'm hungry. What about you?" He asked the last part to Janice. "Yeah, I could eat, I guess." Remus began to drag something through the door, and Janice smelled a new smell from Patton, something strong. put it under Virgil's nose, and the bruised borrower began to finally open his eyes. Janice hadn't realized that Virgil's unconscious state had done so much for his stress levels. "Who are you?" Virgil asked sleepily. "Patton, it's a pleasure to meet you. Don't move too much, okay? I just want to help you sit up so that you can get some food in your stomach. You're looking a little thin." "Food sounds good." "Glad to hear it, but I'm only going to give you a little bit, kiddo. We'll get you more when we get home, something easier on your stomach." It might be an act, it might be fake kindness, but Virgil was awake, and the cookies were delicious. Janice could not be bought or bribed, but maybe, just maybe, luck was finally on their side. Thank you all for listening. Again, this was A Fresh Start, Day 4 in our AU August. I do hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you have a wonderful day.